So, Sinead, you're a journalist almost 20 years based down in Kerry, and you've been covering all sorts of stories. But I have to ask you, is the Kerry baby story something that has always been at the forefront of your reporting?
I think I've grown up with the Kerry baby story all my life. I was 2 years old when the Kerry baby was found, nearly three, I suppose, when the Kerry baby was found on the beach. So this story has been, in every household in Kerry since back then. I mean, I obviously don't remember much about the baby being born, but over the years, the story has come up
Yeah.
obviously several times over the years, and it's been a topic of conversation in every household across Kerry all that time. And it's always stuck with me. Even before I ever got into journalism, the story was well known in Kerry, but from that point of view, it was just a story. And it was a kind of what happened in South Kerry back then in the era of mother and baby homes and all that kind of stuff. And then when I started journalism, the story kind of reappeared again, and it's just been it's been something I've known about all the time, and it's I think there's a great interest in the story because of it's such long running. I mean, it's almost 40 years old now, and we're here today talking about it.
Absolutely. And obviously, there's been recent developments in it, which are probably all about modern policing rather than anything else. But, um, like, so much happened over the years between the tribunal and the arrests of the Hayes family and all the rest of it that sometimes you kind of you have to ground yourself and remember what this story is all about. And of course, it's about the body of a baby washing up on a beach with horrific injuries 40 years ago.
And yeah, I think that sometimes that we do forget that at the center of this case lies a baby that was found on a beach in 1984 with almost 30 stab wounds. And I mean, Gardaí have always said, and again in some of the most recent developments, that this centers around justice for baby John. Baby John was found by someone out running on a beach when he was just 5 days old. It's a very sad story, and it was quite a brutal murder.
Mm.
And that's why the case keeps coming up, because questions do need to be asked and answers do need to be found as to what happened to that baby.
Exactly. And to look at that, I suppose, that crime scene and that baby 5 days old. So this isn't a baby that is murdered just as it's born. The stabbing of a newborn like that, a 5-day-old baby, 28 times, an overkill suggested there. Always over the years, people who analysed these things, um, far greater minds than mine, would have said there was anger, there was, hatred, there was those sort of emotions there with that kill. The baby had been dumped in a manure bag or something from memory,
That's right, a fertilizer bag.
fertilizer
Yeah,
bag, which
yeah.
suggested, obviously this was some sort of a rural crime, perhaps. And it was washed up on a beach, the remains. So, had it come in on the tide, had it been thrown, had the remains of the baby been thrown elsewhere, there was all this sort of stuff. Um, and then nobody came forward. Nobody sort of suggested that somebody had to have been pregnant and was no longer pregnant. I mean, that, from a basic point of view. So yeah, that crime scene and that mystery birth has had all sorts of connotations attached to it, didn't it? And I think over the years, any of us journalists who've looked at this story have considered this must have been a case of incest or rape.
Absolutely. I mean, that is always something that I suppose people believed it would be a very sad story, and they had huge sympathy for whoever may have been involved, given that it would be believed it was, something terrible that happened to them, or this was, incest or a rape case, or, very, very sad. But recent developments kind of are, negate some of the theories that have been thrown out there, though at this point we still don't know much yet. But it was in an era when mother and baby homes still existed and when the church ruled. So it was a very different time. And I still think we have to remember that, but
Mm.
just the theories that we're all believed for almost 40 years may not entirely be the case now, as we discover more in this investigation.
Certainly, after the recent arrests of two people, a female and a male, currently the state of the investigation is not looking into a suggestion of an incest or a rape. That's as much as we can say about it.
Yeah.
Um, but
And we understand the people to be arrested to be the parents of baby John. So, that's given us a new development and someone to speak to about this baby.
like quite a shocking development, really, after all these years. I mean, it's the DNA first of all. Let's just start with that for the moment. But there was a DNA sample taken, and given the advances in DNA, it was suggested that a mass screening in the area could find maybe relatives of the baby, and that could focus the investigation and whatever. And somebody has come forward and given a DNA sample, which, am I right in saying that that is believed to be a sibling of the baby, or some sort of a half sibling of the baby?
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Mm.
exactly what we understand at this point, is that, like, obviously this case, I suppose, to bring us back a few years, in 2018, this case was, a cold case was relaunched. And at the time, Gardaí were adamant they were trying to try and find justice for baby John. So this relaunch in 2018 actually was probably one of the first shocking things in many years, going, well, they're going to reopen this case. And again, a lot of people would have said in Kerry, please don't, let sleeping dogs lie. It's not necessary. Others would have wanted justice for baby John, but Gardaí launched a cold case. And as part of that cold case investigation, they started to take samples, voluntary samples, asking people for some. And one of those voluntary samples appears to have been now from a sibling of baby John.
Mm. And that's what you're talking about there, is really what I'm interested in talking to you about, Sinead, because you're working down in that area. Like, sometimes when you come in from Dublin on a story, a sensitive story, you get the doors closed in your face. Nobody wants to talk to you, and that's totally understandable. But you must have, you know, presumably you're more welcome in the areas when you're asking the questions, or are you? Is there a sense of let sleeping dogs lie?
I think there's probably, if it's fair to say, a split. A lot of people would like to let sleeping dogs lie, because I think they believe, people have suffered a lot in over the last 40 years in this case, especially obviously Joanna Hayes, who was wrongly accused, but just it's been a very sensitive case. So people are quite nervous about that, and sensitive to the people involved. But I think on the other side, there are people who do want justice for baby John. I mean, this is a case that has hung over the county for almost 40 years, for almost my entire life.
Mm.
And even, people have been talking about it on and off over the years. Back in 2018 was the first shock, when it was relaunched. I think that was probably nearly a bigger shock than the one most recent developments, because people never thought that they would really relaunch the case. They thought it was pretty much over and done with.
Mm.
And then to find that they were going to continue investigating, I think, it was quite shocking at the time. Everyone was just stunned, going, they're opening the case, a really old case. I mean, I remember going to that press conference. I remember coming to the office and going, they're reopening the Kerry Babies case. We were all quite shocked as journalists and as people that live in the county. And we attended that press conference, and it was, we're going to investigate the death of baby John, which they have continued to do so.
Mm.
And it was like, this case is coming back up again. It's really, that was back in 2018. But then, people were very stunned and shocked then. But then it kind of died down again. There was 6 months of everyone talking about going, will they find someone? And then it all appeared to go quiet again for a while, until, I suppose, the most recent developments. Now, back in 2021, they did exhume baby John.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a development as well. But again, people kind of thought nothing was going to ever really come of the reopening of the case. I think they had put it out of their minds until 2 weeks ago now, almost, when the arrests were made.
Yeah, exactly. And did you find, when you're asking questions of people, you're obviously having to do it. You're a local person, so you don't want to be making enemies when you're going around. Did you find that people were pointing in any particular directions? Were they trying to help? Were the Gardaí using the media down there? Was there a good relationship there in trying to, you needed to coax out this information. This is a secret. This is a deep, dark secret hidden in the past, whoever these people are. And was there a kind of a sense that the media could help with urging people to come forward for this DNA screening?
Oh, I think so. I think back in 2008, absolutely. Yeah, I think they were hoping, that people would understand why they were doing this, that that we, the media, would explain why they had decided to reopen the case, which was to get justice for baby John. And not so much to, I suppose, to get the people involved. It was just to find justice, to find out what happened to that baby. I suppose what they really want, they told, at the time, they kind of said, we'll treat everyone with sympathy that comes forward. If there's any information, we'll treat that very sensitively. And that's what they've been trying to do, I think, as well. Because again, we don't know exactly at this point what happened to baby John. Obviously, we know he was murdered, but we don't know, who was involved or what the details are. And I think people are still, even in Kerry, they want to treat the family or whoever may be involved in this with sympathy at the same time, because we don't know the full facts yet.
No, and I suppose what we do know at this stage, what is absolutely factual, is that the wrong woman was almost, sent to jail for this, or could have been, had a certain group of police, many of them originally from the Kerry area, got their way. And do you think that going forward, as an aside from this case, that if we're prepared to go into the past to look to solve a criminal case, should we be prepared to look into the past to discover whether and exactly what happened? Was there corruption involved? What were these police doing? Did they conduct their job correctly? Some of them are still alive and in the area. In particular, Jerry O'Carroll has been vocal. He always insisted that he was correct, that Joanne Hayes had had two pregnancies with two different men and two babies, a very rare condition, he was told at the time. But even when it came out that she was not the mother of the child through DNA, he felt he was still right. And I know recently he has finally apologised and accepted that science is correct and he isn't. But do you think that there's a place for the state to be digging into this deeper in looking at the Gardaí, looking at the behaviour of them?
I suppose, yeah, I do. I suppose I personally believe, yes. I mean, obviously, we had a tribunal back in 1985 that was supposed to look into this investigation and to what happened at the house. Someone like that was wrongly charged, but that didn't actually turn out to be the case in 1985. It turned out to be more of a witch hunt against the woman who was wrongly accused, Joanna Hayes. So there's never really been a proper tribunal into what happened into that investigation, and it's quite possibly something that should be looked at going forward when more facts are found out now as we move forward in this investigation. Having the arrest last week now will hopefully lead to more information, and we can find out exactly who was involved and what happened back then, and that may also lead to other investigations.
There should be a tribunal into that bloody tribunal, isn't that what we're saying?
That's
that we
possibly what we were saying. All right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we still don't know what it was an all, that tribunal, and again, I wasn't around, I was quite young then,
Yeah.
but obviously over the years have read and it's come back up again. There's Baby John is one person, but so is Joanna Hayes. She was wrongly, there was love and injustice towards her in this whole saga of 40 years. And I think in some ways, hopefully, even last week, the recent developments will help once and for all, even though obviously over the years she's been exonerated completely, will really finally end it, because now someone else has been put in the frame, whoever they may be.
And tell me this much, is it one of those, I'm sure, of recent times that, if you're out and about, people will sidle up to you and ask you what you know?
I think I can't. I've talked about the Kerry babies for incessantly for nearly 2 weeks now.
Really?
And there is a lot. I mean, I suppose people do want to talk about it, but there is a lot, I have to say, a sensitivity around it. I mean, everyone is conscious of Joanna Hayes and is conscious of the families that now may or may be involved. So there is, I suppose, more of a talking behind closed doors. I think it kind of depends where in the county you are as well. I mean, obviously, where Baby John was found is Carsby in South Kerry. And so people are less inclined to speak more openly there. They're quite fearful of, upsetting anyone or getting involved, whereas in other parts of the county, it's more of a, what happened, why, I think people really do want answers. I think Kerry people have always want answers. I know I do, as growing up in the county, this was kind of a shadow of what happened. And it has always been looked to me to be indicative of what the era was like back then. I mean, I was quite young in the 80s, but it was, like we said, the church, mother and baby homes, fearful of being pregnant outside of wedlock. So this was kind of a case that
it was a horrific.
And the nation has been watching it, and I think as Kerry people and the country as a whole would like to see what happens and have a final answer to this, whatever that may be. And it won't be a nice ending no matter what, because at the end of the day, there is a baby in the centre of this. But it would just put to bed a 40-year-old case.
Do people kind of, look, we can't discuss too much detail about the people that were arrested, but do people gossip about them? Do they want to know who they are? I mean, it is only normal for people to talk outside of kind of public broadcasts, but, are they asking you who they are?
I think they're actually more asking what happened. I think, especially, obviously everyone was shocked, going, oh my God, 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder in a 40-year-old case. So the shock was around the arrest. The question was, who are they? Absolutely. But I think even since then, in the 2 weeks since then, now the question is what actually happens, because obviously these 2 people have now been released without charge, and we still need answers. There's still no conclusion, I suppose, if that's the right word to use.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the talk centers around, here we are again, 40 years later, looking for answers. Are we nearer to answers? We kind of hope so 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks later, we're not so sure anymore, because we're not sure what's going to happen next in this investigation.
Over the years, an awful lot of investigators, proper investigators, cops, I mean, have said to me, it's very important to keep an open mind on cases. I think sometimes as journalists, we tend to hone in on the bleeding obvious, and which we believed in this case was that this was likely a very young mother who had, given birth in tragic circumstances, somewhere out in a field. Um, hasn't it really, in a way, challenged us all on our belief systems and maybe our ability to jump to conclusions?
Absolutely. I think like, it was always thought, that it was, it was a really sad case that, someone must have done, something must have happened. And I think we're like 40 years later, that theory has now changed. And I suppose Kerry is, I suppose for want of a better phrase, it made the county look bad. Here we had a case of a baby found, and, there was no answers to this. And it's symbolic of everything that was happening in Ireland at the time, according to the country. And now it appears that may not be the case. Again, it's very early days in the investigation. We don't know what happened. But, given the age of those arrested, it appears they were slightly older than we would have thought.
There's certainly a changing narrative in that,
Yeah, absolutely. And
undoubtedly.
again, because it's very early days in this investigation, how far we go from here, we still have to treat everyone with compassion, and there probably still could be a reasoning for all this. It just may not what we believed. And it probably does to show that, you keep talking about something, you come up with your own theories, and those theories are kind of negated now.
Absolutely. Well, Sinead Kelleher, thank you very much.
Thank you.